Sarah Thompson's eyes darted between her son's pale face and the steadily beeping medical monitor mounted next to his bed. The oxygen saturation numbers flickered, 94, 92, 90, each drop making her heart clench a little tighter. At just 12 years old, Marcus had already become far too familiar with these moments of crisis, his rare form of mitochondrial disease turning everyday life into a precarious balance between stability and emergency. Outside their two-story colonial home in Oak Ridge Estates, their converted ambulance, lovingly nicknamed Big Blue by Marcus, sat ready in the curved driveway, its pristine white and blue exterior gleaming under the morning sun. The vehicle wasn't just transportation, it was their lifeline, a mobile medical unit custom-equipped with everything Marcus might need during his frequent trips to Children's Hospital. The modification costs had drained Sarah's life savings and the insurance payout from her late husband's policy, but she'd never regretted a single penny. Sarah adjusted Marcus's nasal cannula, her movements gentle and practiced after years of providing care. The digital clock on his bedside table read 7:23 am, another early morning crisis narrowly averted. Through the window, she could see her neighbors beginning their day, power walking in coordinated athleisure or backing luxury cars out of garage doors that all matched the HOA's approved color scheme. Oak Ridge top number 274. They'd moved to Oak Ridge Estates 6 months ago, drawn by its crucial 8-minute drive to Children's Hospital. The previous 45-minute commute from their old house had nearly cost Marcus his life during a particularly severe episode, and Sarah had vowed never to let distance be a factor again. The HOA fees here made her nursing salary stretch thin, forcing her to pick up extra shifts in the pediatric ICU, but the proximity to emergency care was worth every sacrifice. Their real estate agent had warned them about Oak Ridge Estates' strict community guidelines: no unauthorized exterior modifications, no visible trash bins, no unapproved paint colors, but had assured them that medical accommodations were protected by state law. Sarah had done her due diligence, submitting all of Marcus's medical documentation to the HOA board before purchasing the house. The previous board, led by a retired judge named Thomas Chen, had been understanding and even helpful, expediting their application when they learned about Marcus's condition. That morning, as Sarah prepared Marcus's breakfast, carefully measuring portions of his specialized diet, she watched through the kitchen window as Nancy from next door slowed her morning jog to snap a photo of Big Blue. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed neighbors documenting their vehicle, but something about Nancy's furtive glances and quick retreat made Sarah's nurse intuition tingle with warning. Marcus's voice called from upstairs, weak but steady. "Mom, can you help me get ready for PT?" Sarah pushed her concerns aside, focusing on the day ahead. They had physical therapy at 10, followed by a checkup with Dr. Rodriguez at Children's Hospital at 2. The schedule was demanding, but Marcus never complained. He approached each day with a quiet determination that sometimes broke Sarah's heart. No 12-year-old should have to be so brave. As she helped Marcus with his morning routine, Sarah caught a glimpse of their HOA's newly elected president, Karen Davidson, power walking past their house for the third time that morning. Karen's perfectly styled blonde bob didn't move an inch as she spoke rapidly into her phone, her free hand gesturing at something in the direction of the Thompsons' driveway. The woman had taken office just 2 weeks ago, running on a platform of preserving property values and maintaining community standards. Sarah felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She'd been to enough HOA meetings to recognize the signs of brewing conflict, but surely even Karen Davidson wouldn't interfere with medical equipment. After all, this was about her son's life, not about property values or community aesthetics. If only Sarah had known then just how wrong she was. The letter arrived 3 days later, sealed with the Oak Ridge Estates gold emblem and marked "Urge into violation notice" in aggressive red letters. Sarah had just finished administering Marcus's morning medication when she spotted the envelope protruding from their designer-approved copper mailbox. The previous one had been deemed inconsistent with community aesthetics. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore open the envelope, scattering gold foil across her freshly swept porch. The letter inside was printed on expensive letterhead, the HOA's logo watermarked beneath lines of carefully crafted threats. Dear Mrs. Thompson, it has come to the board's attention that you are maintaining an unauthorized emergency vehicle on your property. According to Section 7.32 of the Oak Ridge Estates Community Guidelines, commercial vehicles, including but not limited to ambulances, are strictly prohibited from overnight parking within community boundaries. You have 48 hours to remove this violation or face fines of $200 per day. Sarah had to read the notice 3 times before its full implications sank in. Each paragraph was copied to every board member, with Karen Davidson's signature prominently displayed at the bottom, alongside her newly acquired title, HOA President and Community Standards Director. That evening, Sarah attended the monthly HOA meeting, armed with Marcus's medical documentation and letters from 3 different specialists explaining the necessity of their modified ambulance. The community center's meeting room was packed with residents, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and judgment. Karen Davidson sat at the center of the board table, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light as she called the meeting to order. Her perfectly manicured hands shuffled papers with practiced efficiency, her voice carrying that particular tone of artificial sweetness that set Sarah's teeth on edge. Now, regarding the Thompson situation, Karen announced 15 minutes into the meeting, we must address the ongoing violation of our commercial vehicle guidelines. Sarah stood, medical documents clutched to her chest. It's not a commercial vehicle, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It's modified medical transport equipment, essential for my sons. If we make an exception for you, Karen interrupted, adjusting her designer glasses, next thing you know, this prestigious community will look like a parking lot for food trucks and construction vehicles. Rules exist for a reason, Mrs. Thompson. The room fell silent. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others carefully blank. She took a deep breath, channeling the calm she maintained during hospital emergencies. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically protects medical accommodations, Sarah explained, pulling out a highlighted copy of the relevant legislation. Our previous board president, Mr. Chen, approved. Mr. Chen is no longer with us, Karen cut in sharply, and his lenient interpretations of our guidelines are precisely why property values have stagnated. This is a luxury community, Mrs. Thompson, not a medical facility. From the back of the room, Nancy from next door raised her hand. I have photos, she announced, shooting Sarah an apologetic look that didn't match her eager tone. The vehicle is visible from 3 different streets. Karen's smile widened fractionally. Thank you, Nancy. The documentation has been noted. She turned back to Sarah, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. Perhaps, Mrs. Thompson, given your unique situations, Oak Ridge Estates isn't the best fit for your family's needs. The implied threat hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt her professional composure cracking. My son's medical transport isn't up for debate, she stated firmly. I'll have my lawyer review the guidelines. As you wish, Karen replied smoothly, making a show of noting something in her leather-bound planner. In the meantime, the fines will begin accumulating at midnight tomorrow. Now, moving on to the issue of unauthorized bird feeders in Section C. Sarah remained standing for a moment longer, her ears ringing with barely contained fury. Across the room, she caught the eye of Thomas Chen's wife, who gave her a subtle nod. Something in the older woman's expression suggested that this battle was far from over, and Sarah wasn't going to be fighting it alone. Karen Davidson's campaign against the Thompsons unfolded with the precision of a military operation. By the end of the week, every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates had received a glossy 16-page property value protection report in their mailboxes. The cover featured a professional photograph of Big Blue, artfully shot at an angle that made the medical transport vehicle appear looming and ominous against the manicured landscape. Sarah discovered the report when returning from Marcus's therapy session, her son dozing in his wheelchair after an exhausting day of treatments. The sight of their vehicle prominently displayed beneath bold red text reading URGNT, protecting your investment, made her stomach churn. Inside, Karen had orchestrated a masterpiece of manipulation. Charts and graphs illustrated projected property devaluation patterns, all mysteriously emanating from the Thompsons' address. A real estate expert, who happened to be Karen's brother-in-law, provided a detailed analysis of how emergency vehicles could reduce home values by up to 15% within a 3-block radius. But Karen's tactical error came during the annual Oak Ridge Estates pool party, an event that had been mandatory ever since she'd taken office. The evening sun was setting over the Olympic-sized pool, and Marcus was enjoying a rare moment of normalcy, floating in his specialized water chair while chatting with Emily, Jessica, and Maria, 3 teenage girls who had become his regular babysitters and fiercest advocates. Karen, 3 glasses deep into her imported rosé, had gathered a group of potential HOA board supporters near the cocktail table. She didn't notice Emily's iPhone propped carefully against a flower arrangement, its camera recording as Karen launched into what she thought was a private conversation. "It's about standards," Karen's voice carried across the quiet pool area. "Some people, and I won't name names, are exploiting their children's conditions for special treatment. If we allow one medical vehicle, next thing you know, we'll have wheelchair ramps destroying our curb appeal and hospital beds visible through front windows." The pool area fell silent except for the gentle lapping of water. Marcus's face crumpled as he sank lower in his chair, trying to make himself invisible. Emily immediately moved to block his view of Karen, while Jessica pressed the save button on her phone with trembling fingers. Maria, whose father served as chief of surgery at Children's Hospital, stood up slowly from her lifeguard chair. "Mrs. Davidson," she called out, her voice clear and steady, "would you mind repeating that statement about wheelchair ramps? My father's hospital board is very interested in documenting discrimination cases against disabled minors." The color drained from Karen's face as she finally noticed the dozens of phones pointed in her direction, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her attack. The next morning, Sarah found violation stickers plastered across Big Blue's windows, one for each time the vehicle had exceeded the new 30-minute maximum driveway parking limit that Karen had unilaterally implemented overnight. The community began to divide into clear factions. While some neighbors now avoided Sarah entirely, others started leaving anonymous notes of support in her mailbox. Thomas Chen's wife, Linda, a retired civil rights attorney, began documenting every instance of Karen's escalating harassment. Security cameras mysteriously appeared on houses adjacent to the Thompsons, their lenses carefully aimed to capture any interference with the medical transport vehicle. Sarah maintained meticulous records of every interaction, every notice, and every violation sticker. She photographed Karen's luxury SUV as it drove past their house 6 times each morning, its driver clearly documenting their every move. But it was Marcus's medical diary that proved most damaging, his careful notes about increased anxiety, disrupted sleep patterns, and stress-triggered episodes building a clear pattern of medical impact from the harassment. The situation was reaching a breaking point, and everyone in Oak Ridge Estates could feel it. The only question was who would make the first decisive move. The night that changed everything started with a sound Sarah Thompson had learned to dread, the high-pitched wail of Marcus's seizure monitor cutting through the quiet of their bedroom at 2:17 a.m. Sarah's eyes snapped open, muscle memory propelling her down the hallway before her conscious mind fully registered the emergency. Marcus was rigid in his bed, his oxygen levels plummeting as the seizure took hold. Sarah's trained hands moved swiftly, implementing the emergency protocols she performed countless times before. But this seizure was different, more severe than usual, with Marcus's lips taking on a frightening bluish tinge. "Hold on, baby," Sarah whispered, already reaching for her phone to activate their emergency response plan. Big Blue was equipped with everything they needed: the specific anti-seizure medications, the oxygen delivery system calibrated to Marcus's needs, the modified restraints designed for safe transport during episodes. She could hear thunder rolling in the distance as she ran downstairs, medical bag clutched to her chest. The security lights illuminated the driveway through a light drizzle, and Sarah's heart stopped. Big Blue was blocked in, hemmed tight on both sides by 2 massive construction vehicles bearing the logo of Davidson Developments. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, running out into the rain. There was less than 6 inches of clearance on either side of the ambulance. Even if she could squeeze through, she'd risk damaging the medical equipment mounted on Big Blue's sides. Her hand trembled as she dialed 911, knowing that waiting for a standard ambulance would cost them precious minutes they didn't have. The security camera footage would later show the full scope of Karen's calculated cruelty. At 6:43 p.m. the previous evening, Karen could be seen directing the parking of both vehicles, gesturing with precise measurements to ensure Big Blue was completely trapped. Her voice carried clearly on the recording, "Make sure it can't move an inch." "Let's see how they handle a real emergency now." Sarah paced in the rain as dispatch assured her an ambulance was en route. Through Marcus's window, she could hear him struggling to breathe. 8 minutes to the hospital had become 30, each second marked by her son's distress. The normal ambulance wasn't equipped with Marcus's specific medication cocktail, the unique combination that they kept stored at the precise temperature in Big Blue's custom medical fridge. When the EMTs finally arrived, their faces showed the gravity of the situation. Marcus's vitals were dangerously unstable, his oxygen saturation dropping despite supplemental oxygen. As they loaded him into the standard ambulance, Sarah caught movement at Karen's window, a shadow quickly retreating behind expensive curtains. The emergency room was a blur of activity. Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus's neurologist, had been called in specially, her face grim as she reviewed the delayed response time. 30 minutes without his specific meds, she noted, shaking her head. "Sarah, this delay could have been catastrophic. What happened?" Sarah stood by Marcus's hospital bed, watching his chest rise and fall with each assisted breath. Her phone was heavy in her hand as she scrolled through her recent calls, stopping at the number she'd been avoiding for weeks, Maria Rodriguez, no relation to Dr. Rodriguez, the disability rights attorney Linda Chen had recommended. The security footage played on Sarah's tablet, showing Karen's deliberate actions in trapping their medical transport. Each frame strengthened her resolve. This wasn't about property values anymore. It wasn't about community standards or HOA regulations. Karen Davidson had knowingly, deliberately created a situation that put a disabled child's life at risk. As the morning sun began to peek through the hospital windows, Sarah stepped into the hallway and pressed call. Her voice was steady when the attorney's office answered, steel replacing the exhaustion in her tone. "My name is Sarah Thompson," she said quietly, "and I need your help to stop someone from killing my son." Maria Rodriguez's corner office overlooked the children's hospital where Marcus was still recovering. The disability rights attorney sat across from Sarah, her desk covered with meticulously organized evidence files. 3 days had passed since the emergency, and Sarah hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time, but her exhaustion was giving way to something stronger, determination. "This isn't just about your son anymore," Maria explained, pulling up a digital timeline on her tablet. "In the past 18 months, since Karen Davidson joined the HOA board, 4 families with medical needs have left Oak Ridge Estates. We've found a pattern." Sarah leaned forward as Maria swiped through the evidence. There was the Miller family, whose request for a wheelchair ramp was repeatedly lost in processing. The Paddles, whose medical oxygen delivery service was banned during quiet hours. The Johnsons, whose application for a therapy pool was denied while Karen's decorative fountain was fast-tracked for approval. "But this is what sealed it," Maria continued, pulling up a series of emails recovered through a former HOA board member's conscience-driven leak. The messages, spanning 6 months, detailed Karen's systematic campaign to encourage high-maintenance residents to reconsider their living situation. In one particularly damning exchange, Karen had written, "Property values aren't just about aesthetics. Certain residents create unfortunate associations. Better to deal with it early than let the problem spread." The email had been sent the day after she'd first spotted Big Blue in the Thompsons' driveway. Linda Chen, who'd been quietly sitting in the corner taking notes, spoke up. "There's more. I've been monitoring a private Facebook group where Karen participates. She's been coaching other HOA presidents on what she calls selective enforcement, using technical violations to target specific residents." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, one of Marcus's teenage babysitters. The girl had been investigating on her own, discovering a network of discriminatory practices that went beyond Oak Ridge Estates. Karen, it seemed, had built a reputation among certain HOA circles for her community improvement techniques. "Look at this," Jessica's message read, accompanied by screenshots from a private HOA leadership forum. Karen had posted detailed strategies for what she called community curation, including guidelines for using emergency vehicle regulations to discourage families with medical needs from moving in. Maria's assistant entered with another stack of documents, affidavits from former residents, maintenance staff, and even a whistleblower from Karen's real estate office. Each piece added to a picture of calculated discrimination masked as community standards enforcement. The Americans with Disabilities Act is clear, Maria explained, highlighting key passages in the legal documents before them. But we're also looking at violations of the Fair Housing Act, civil rights statutes, and state-specific protections for medical accommodation. The fact that she deliberately blocked emergency medical transport, that moves this into criminal endangerment territory. Sarah studied the growing mountain of evidence, her nurses' training helping her catalog and cross-reference medical impact statements with Karen's documented actions. How did she get away with this for so long? Fear. Linda answered simply. Fear of property values dropping, fear of confrontation, fear of being the next target, but that ends now. Maria nodded, pulling up a draft of the legal complaint on her computer. We're not just filing a civil suit. This is going to the Housing Authority, the State Attorney General's Office, and the Federal Housing Commission. Karen Davidson isn't just going to pay damages, she's going to become a case study in how not to run an HOA. Outside the office window, an ambulance pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, its lights flashing silently through the glass. Sarah watched it, thinking of Big Blue still trapped in their driveway, of Marcus in his hospital bed, of all the families who'd been driven away before them. What do you need from me? She asked, turning back to Maria with renewed energy. The attorney smiled, her expression both fierce and reassuring. Just what you're best at, Mrs. Thompson. Detailed documentation and absolute honesty. We're going to let Karen's own actions do the rest. The lawsuit landed on the HOA board's desk at precisely 9:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, served by a process server who knew exactly where to find Karen Davidson at her regular morning property standards walkthrough. The thick manila envelope contained not just the $100,000 civil suit, but a devastating array of state and federal violations that made the monetary demands seem almost secondary. Karen's perfectly maintained composure cracked as she read through the documents, her face shifting from its usual mask of superiority to something approaching fear. The lawsuit detailed 7 distinct violations of federal law, each carrying its own substantial penalties. Her hands trembled as she reached page 4, where her own emails about community curation were quoted in damning detail. By 10:30 a.m., Karen had summoned an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening. Her mass email to residents cited urgent community business, but word of the lawsuit had already begun spreading through Oak Ridge Estate's carefully manicured streets. The community's private Facebook group exploded with activity as details leaked out, each new revelation adding fuel to the fire. Did you see this? Nancy from next door texted Sarah, attaching screenshots from the lawsuit that were now circulating online. The part about her blocking medical transport, I had no idea. I'm so sorry I ever helped her document your vehicle. The community center was packed by 7:00 p.m., with residents spilling out into the parking lot. Karen had arranged the room in its usual configuration, with the board elevated on a small platform, but her attempt at maintaining authority backfired spectacularly. As she called the meeting to order, Linda Chen stood up from her seat in the front row. Before we begin, Linda announced, her voice carrying the weight of decades in civil rights law, I believe we should address the criminal endangerment charges being considered by the district attorney's office. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face went pale as Linda continued, We have documented evidence of deliberate interference with emergency medical equipment, resulting in a child's hospitalization. Would you like to explain your actions to the community, Mrs. Davidson? Karen reached for her usual tactics, straightening her pearl necklace as she began, This is a simple matter of community standards. My daughter could have died. Sarah's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood in the doorway, Marcus in his wheelchair beside her, just released from the hospital. The room fell silent as they made their way forward, past neighbors who now couldn't meet their eyes. Maria Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing from the back, stepped forward with a thick folder. We have testimony from 17 current and former residents detailing systematic discrimination against families with medical needs. Would the board like to review these cases individually, or shall we proceed directly to the discussion of personal liability? Karen's attempt to call for a private board session dissolved as residents began standing up, one by one, sharing their own stories of intimidation and selective enforcement. The teenage babysitter's video of her pool party rant played on someone's phone, her slurred voice echoing through the stunned room. Some people are exploiting their children's conditions. A local news van pulled into the parking lot, tipped off by an anonymous source. Through the windows, residents could see Karen's face on the camera's preview screen, her attempts to slip out the back door captured in high definition. The meeting devolved into chaos as board members, suddenly aware of their own legal exposure, began distancing themselves from Karen's actions. Her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbled as her fellow board members voted to suspend her powers pending investigation. "This isn't personal," Karen tried one last time, her voice weak against the rising tide of opposition. "I was just protecting our property values." "No," Sarah replied, her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This was very personal. You just never expected to be held accountable for it." As Karen fled the meeting, leaving her designer briefcase behind, the remaining board members huddled with Maria Rodriguez, already discussing settlement terms. The revolution in Oak Ridge Estates had begun, and there would be no going back to business as usual. What Karen had dismissed as one entitled mother transformed into an uprising that shook Oak Ridge Estates to its foundations. The day after the explosive board meeting, residents began arriving at Maria Rodriguez's office in a steady stream, each carrying pieces of evidence that painted a disturbing picture of systematic discrimination. James Chen, the former HOA president's son and a cybersecurity expert, recovered deleted emails from the HOA's server showing Karen's calculated targeting of families with medical needs. The emails revealed a points-based system she developed, rating homes based on visual impact concerns, with medical equipment and accessibility modifications earning the highest negative scores. She kept spreadsheets, James explained, displaying color-coded documents on his laptop. Every medical transport, every wheelchair ramp, every oxygen tank delivery, all logged and tracked. She called it her community impact assessment, but it was really a hit list. The revelations sparked a wave of soul-searching among residents who had remained silent. Nancy, still guilt-ridden over her role in photographing Big Blue, organized a neighborhood support network for families with medical needs. The same residents who had once avoided eye contact with Sarah now stopped by with casseroles, offers of help, and tearful apologies. Marcus's story went viral when his favorite nurse, Amanda, shared it on TikTok. The video, featuring security footage of Karen directing the parking job that blocked Big Blue, garnered millions of views within hours. Disability rights activists across the country began scrutinizing their own HOA regulations, using the Oak Ridge Estates case as a catalyst for change. Local news crews descended on the community, but they found a different story than the typical HOA dispute. Instead of divided neighbors, they discovered a community learning painful lessons about silence and complicity. The teenage babysitters, Emily, Jessica, and Maria, had compiled a documentary's worth of footage showing Karen's systematic harassment, including incidents involving other families who had been forced out. "We should have spoken up sooner," Emily said during a community meeting, her voice shaking but determined. "We saw what was happening to Marcus and other kids like him, but we were scared of making things worse." Never again. Karen's professional life imploded as the story spread. Her prestigious real estate firm, facing a tsunami of negative publicity, placed her on indefinite administrative leave. Their Google reviews plummeted as past clients came forward with stories of discriminatory steering. Karen had apparently been advising families with medical needs to look in other neighborhoods. The former HOA president, Thomas Chen, emerged from retirement to provide devastating testimony about Karen's rise to power. He revealed how she had manipulated election procedures, using proxy votes from absent homeowners to secure her position. His meticulous records showed a clear pattern of discrimination disguised as community standards enforcement. Support poured in from unexpected quarters. A group of architectural students from the local university volunteered to design accessible modifications that complemented the community's aesthetic. Medical equipment suppliers offered to paint oxygen tanks and mobility devices in HOA-approved colors, turning Karen's obsession with appearance into a tool for inclusion. Sarah watched the community's transformation from Marcus's hospital room, where he was making a steady recovery. The walls were covered with cards and letters, not just from neighbors, but from families across the country sharing similar stories of HOA discrimination. Each message strengthened their resolve to turn their ordeal into lasting change. Linda Chen, reviewing the mounting evidence, smiled grimly. Karen wanted to protect property values. Wait until the national media picks up the story of how she endangered a child's life over parking regulations. Her name will become synonymous with HOA overreach. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. A national morning show wanted to interview them, focusing on the broader issue of disability discrimination in residential communities. The segment producer had a personal stake. Her own sister had faced similar HOA harassment over a therapy dog. "Mom," Marcus said, reading the message over her shoulder, "we have to do it. Not just for us, but for everyone else too." Sarah squeezed his hand, noting how the community's support had helped restore his confidence. What Karen had intended as isolation had instead created an unshakable foundation of solidarity.